Good afternoon. Rhyme of the Times 2022 Review of the Year. Part 2. Foreign Affairs. Act 2. Assassinations, demonstrations. China's lockdown nation and indignation. Kim's escalation. Female subjugation. A cop-out in a desert nation. Acceleration of the world's population. January the 8th, Colleyville was the nexus of a hostage situation in the state of Texas. A British national had the world agog with an 11-hour siege in a synagogue. Malik Akram took 4 people at gunpoint, threatened to kill them one by one at one point. But in the end, he was the only one who died at the hands of the FBI. It wasn't suicide. In northwest Syria in February, the US claimed a major counter-terrorist success. The leader of ISIS in hiding was cooped when he found himself trapped by American troops. He blew himself up with around 10 family members, choosing that option instead of surrender. In Afghanistan in August, another successful operation for the USA with a drone assassination. The target was Ayman al-Zawahiri. As leader of Al-Qaeda, an important scalp in theory. Many people consider anti-vaxxers a pseudo. In Canada, they caused some trouble for PM Trudeau. In early February, he had brought in measures to try to relieve some border pressures. When protests started a few weeks before, the goal was to have vaccine passports no more. But as with many of these anti-vax wars, they morphed into settling other scores. The goalposts move, and then so does the game, and violence is introduced to support the new aim. Initially, just truckers were getting irate, wanting an end to vaccine mandates. They started an Ottawa occupation, but protests spread around the nation. Blockades on almost every major highway, including border crossings to the USA. The protests started by the Freedom Convoy became an excuse to disrupt and destroy, a magnet for those that favour insurrection, anarchists and those with far-right connections. So just in time, Justin Trudeau took action. On the February 14th, he brought the Emergency Act in. The Act is there to only be invoked when the country's infrastructure is about to be choked. And all was cleared up by the end of the week, and Trudeau's government didn't look quite so weak. In mid-March, into England, an RAF plane sneaked. On it was a British woman, relieved but piqued. Why had 5 foreign secretaries failed and 3 prime ministers not prevailed in getting her release from a Tehran jail where she'd languished for 6 years with no chance of bail? She'd been freed, rearrested, released on parole, all part of a cruel game of state control. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe had always remonstrated that the charges of spying were fabricated, and sure enough the reason for her predicament was an unpaid debt from the British government. Anousheh Ashouri had a similar ordeal, till Liz Truss at last did the long-called-for deal. In the city of Shanghai, they were on a roll, with the Chinese penchant for state control. From an apartment window, a woman's cry, "Send us provisions before we die." In China, a COVID lockdown means just that, 24/7 imprisoned in your house or flat. You might as well throw away your keys unless you happen to catch the disease. Then the astronauts will give special care in an isolation unit in God knows where. And delivery drivers, there are not enough to provide every home with food and stuff. An Omicron surge had the government annoyed, and so they acted all paranoid. Meaning, if there is just one COVID case, they will be locking down the whole damn place. So in Shanghai, imprisoned they keep all 25 million of their people. In China, living with the virus means normality until it intervenes. Then it's a return to apocalyptic scenes, normality a million miles away it seems. But in November we rubbed our eyes. The pictures from China were beyond a surprise. Mass public chaos resulting from despair, unrest not seen since Tiananmen Square. 10 or more died in a fire in a high-rise block. The government denied the building had been locked. The zero-COVID rules had been harsh and sweeping. Now the lid had blown off as resentment deepened. Now into the protests was seeping and creeping demands for the removal of President Xi Jinping. They might see demonstrators as demons and traitors, but the dissent still shook up the communist dictators. Then, in an unexpected turn of events, freedom was bestowed upon China's residents, and freedom allowed the virus to circulate. COVID cases are rising at an alarming rate. They can now travel the world, but how ironic. To get to many places, they must prove they're not sick. China's regime had tested its people too far. They rebelled, and now they have to be tested to go far. China began this horror film 3 years ago. Let's pray this ain't a sequel that they're about to show. President Xi was full of anguish in August with Nancy in his parish. She hadn't gone to see the Chinese president but was supporting Taiwan's independence. The American House Speaker Nancy Pelosi spent 2 days in Taipei having a mosey. China views Taiwan a little bit the same as Putin sees his relationship with Ukraine. So Xi's anxiety could be understood with Pelosi in his neighbourhood. China's response was aggressive, nationalistic. Taiwan suffered cyber attacks. Xi went ballistic. In October, Nancy had a break-in at her home. She was away, but her husband was home alone. The intention was for a high-profile kidnapping, but instead an appalling attack on Paul happened. 3 weeks later, Pelosi offered her adieu, stepping down as Speaker at 82. Revered and reviled, not many can match her as a politician of enormous stature. The hammer attack on her husband was part of the reason why she chose to depart. Division has arisen on both sides of the pond since the leadership of 2 bombastic blondes. In October, China was more stable on the whole. Dictatorships tend to exert their control. At the party conference, President Xi confirmed his absolute authority. A 3rd term as head of the communist regime, he concluded by unveiling his executive team. The week-long Communist Party Congress had plenty of celebration of the country's success. Lots of self-praise, but not much else happened. Mild sabre rattling and wire back slapping, and good food. And there was a lot on Xi's China plate. COVID lockdowns, Russia and Taiwan to contemplate. And of course, Hong Kong remains a thorn in its side because they still want a system where the masses decide. In May, its leader for 5 years, Carrie Lam, had been replaced by John Lee, a Beijing man. 25 years since Britain left, Lee is China's choice. Hong Kong is losing its democratic voice. And that issue was brought home in Manchester in October by a pro-democracy protester. He was dragged into the Chinese consulate, which had the patrolling police on alert. He emerged soon after, a little bruised. A diplomat was summoned, but he was no use. His explanation was somewhat obtuse, claiming it was China that had been abused. On the 14th of April, the French election was completed and the centrists had the populists defeated. Macron beat Le Pen by 17%, so was granted a second term as president. A much smaller gap than 5 years ago. For Le Pen, though, still a definite no. The first term in office for Emmanuel for many French people didn't go too well. Indeed, after this second term was sealed, anger in the streets could not be concealed. Nowadays, democracy seems not to be enough. If you can't win at the ballot, just try acting tough. More saber-rattling from North Korea's autarch. Russia's war probably had Kim Jong-un a bit narked. Painted on smile, but he often seems irked, always testing whether his weapons will work. Desperate despots crave to be the world's focal point. Putin has probably put his nose out of joint. So the overweight, narcissistic little boy throughout the year kept showing off his toys. In 2022, a record number of missiles fired, including one that raised Japanese ire. One of Kim's rockets cleared the neighbour's fence. So Japan put a rocket up its spending on defence. At each launch we are shown the self-approving Kim with his obedient generals flanking and thanking him. Obsequious fawning, painfully erect, showing their undiminishing respect for their leader and his nuclear missiles, a crazed ecocentric with dangerous projectiles. The world fears what may lurk behind the mad smile, but as with Putin, will it stay in denial? In May, from Afghanistan, disappointing news, the Taliban imposing their medieval views. The light of hope once more is dimming. Face covering must again be worn by women. Many feared this might be the thin end of the wedge as Afghanistan shuffled closer to the edge. Then in June an earthquake hit the southeast. Devastating damage, 1,000 dead at least. The Taliban, though, do not enjoy good relations with many of the world's developed nations. Since returning to power, foreign aid more than halved. The regime cannot handle the starving and the starved. After the West legged it in 2021, most, if not all, the progress was undone. 20 years of Western occupation achieved very little for this desperate nation. The Taliban's brutal way of ruling, again denying girls their right to schooling, clamping down on any hint of opposition, not coming to terms with their apparent fear of women, now banning them from working for NGOs because in NGOs they can wear the wrong clothes. Similar intransigence caused Iran's unrest, sparked by Mahsa Amini's unwarranted arrest. The morality police imposed their morals, took Mahsa in, but it seems that she quarrelled, so the police showed that they are up for a fight when an unarmed woman doesn't wear her hijab right. Many claimed that the authorities were lying when they said they played no part in Mahsa's dying. The 22-year-old unwittingly a martyr, dying just because she should have dressed smarter. The government's response was not at all smart, their iron fist causing the rioting to start. Masses of women in city centres thronged in the name of women's rights and women being wronged. Tear gas and live fire being used on the crowds, but the people of Iran just would not be cowed. Social media closed down, random arrests, but still women burned their traditional dress. A shocked world viewed Iran's emotional groundswell where the will of the people will not be quelled, and the whole world looked with anticipation at this fight for female emancipation. And Iran's men now offer their support to the women's fight that's being fought. Dobbs versus Jackson Women Health Organization was a legal case in America that stirred up the nation. In 2018, Mississippi voted for a law banning abortions after 15 weeks or more, but an abortion clinic challenged the decision and a federal judge backed their opposition. In June, the case went to the Supreme Court. Justice Samuel Alito had leaked what he thought. And on 24th of June, the judgment was made to overturn the ruling of Roe versus Wade, That landmark case of 1973 stopped abortion in the US being a felony, but that decision of 49 years ago was egregiously wrong, said Judge Alito. So the anti-abortion lobby celebrate. Abortion is now outlawed in 14 states. The Supreme Court's verdict by Biden... The Supreme Court's verdict by Biden was slated. They've made some terrible decisions, he stated. Throughout the year, Biden's often been outspoken, talking off record, protocol broken. Some call it straight talking, speaking his mind. More like losing his mind, opponents opined. But despite Democratic expectations being low, the midterms in November weren't such a blow. In the Senate, they held every one of their seats. In Congress, they suffered just a marginal defeat. It seems the Supreme Court's ruling had aroused much pro-abortion fire that would not be doused. While Republicans looked backwards to their stolen election, voters had moved on to women's rights protection. Trump had just announced he would run once more in the presidential election of 2024, but in these midterms all his picks failed, suggesting that his ship may also have sailed. The disruptor, the blagger, the outright bragger, still leading his disciples on a mission to MAGA. But he's now in what seems an unfixable fix after an investigation about January the 6th. The report in December said Trump carries the can. The central cause of what happened is down to just one man. And now his taxes are under scrutiny, and tax fraud was found in a former company. And there's a probe into mishandled documents during his time as the White House occupant. Trump carries the can, but can he carry his party while being hassled and harried? Joe Biden in May visited Buffalo, New York State. In a speech he called for the rejection of hate. It was 3 days after a mass shooting there in Tops Friendly Market, a hateful nightmare. 10 black innocent people slaughtered, fathers, mothers, sons and daughters. An 18-year-old, the perpetrator, a white supremacist, a black and brown hater. The attack was meticulously planned. A manifesto emerged to help us understand. The 180 pages of illogical thoughts revealed just such hatred, innate or taught. More tellingly, recent mental health issues may have explained his actions and his views. But why can arms be given with such ease to someone with severe mental disease? Weak minds succumb to online heresy. Weak laws let weak minds act out their fantasy. A small city in Texas called Uvalde, unknown to the world before 24th of May. Now a place synonymous with classroom slaughter. 19 kids shot dead by a teenage assaulter. Salvador Ramos, the angry young man, started his rampage by shooting his gran. Something in his head had clearly switched. He got in a car and drove into a ditch. Got out with fevered brain, thinking it cool to unleash 100+ rounds into a school. 18 years old, some deep anger stifled, found his release in an AR-style rifle. With a weapon meant to rip humans to pieces, he killed infant sons, daughters, nephews, nieces, turning a classroom into a gruesome scene from some video game or war movie he'd seen. An outside door to the school was left ajar, an invitation for his angst to be taken too far. Locking himself in that room as kids cowered, 19 police in the hallway acting like cowards. While children inside called 911, the police dithered over what should be done, ignoring their own active shooter doctrine, telling them to confront an armed guy who's locked in. 2 2 teachers also killed, and it has to be said that it's small consolation that Ramos is now dead. After 40 minutes, when the police delayed, they finally went in and the assailant was slayed. On Friday, in front of parents and press, a Texan public safety chief looked very distressed. The police got it wrong, the words of Steve McCraw. For the bereaved parents, words that stuck in the craw. But Republican Ted Cruz expressed his view more armed guards in schools would solve the issue. Don't ban guns, don't take away our rights, don't take our rights away. But those rights are wrong, Democrats say. Mean-looking guys with tattooed bare arms marched to protect their right to bear arms, and that's what they did just 4 days later, putting the entire blame on the sick agitator. Trump was a guest at that Houston convention, where the NRA had no time for reflection. Joe and Jill then went to Uvalde by aeroplane, where they witnessed local post-traumatic pain. But as the gulf between the gun debate widens, offering national hope is tough for the Bidens. 10 days between the last 2 mass shooting events had opened up again the guns argument. The right to bear arms is set in cement, entombed in the bedrock of the Second Amendment. Robb Elementary School robbed of 21 lives and many scarred minds for those that survived. The NRA, with all reasons under the sun, defend their God-given right to have a gun, while in Britain we cherish our unarmed Bobby and really don't get the NRA lobby. May the 11th, and Palestine was in distress. An Al Jazeera journalist, a fated member of the press, Shireen Abu Akleh, was reporting, it said, when Israeli forces shot her in the head. For months, Sri Lanka suffered unrest each day. In July, President Rajapaksa finally ran away. A lack of food and fuel had caused consternation, with protests increasing all across the nation. When an angry mob set his residence on fire, Rajapaksa knew his tenure had expired. On the day that Boris's resignation was penned, a former PM faced a more brutal end. Shinzo Abe, a popular but divisive man, was the longest-serving PM ever for Japan. On the streets of Nara, gunshots rang out loud. An assassin shot him twice as he addressed the crowd. In September, Italy took a sharp right turn, providing much of Europe with some concern. Giorgia Meloni led the Brothers of Italy to become the PM in a battle fought bitterly. October the 22nd, and she was sworn in. Her first cabinet sent as sober for warning. With far-right views, some consider quite sinister, the country's first female Prime Minister announced her new coalition team, trying to tell us it's not as extreme as it seems. But with some members harbouring views promoted by Mussolini in World War II, people are getting nervous about Italy's direction since the brothers won the national election. But Italy's politics are so volatile, this system may lead the brothers for only a short while. Israel's chaos evoked similar right-wing fears, with a 5th election in 4 turbulent years. As we enter 2023, who's in charge? Guess who? Of course, the ubiquitous Netanyahu. In Brazil, they moved in the opposite direction after the result of October's election. Right-wing incumbent Bolsonaro with defeat left-wing Lula to take up his seat. And Peru's new president set a new president. Dina Boluarte is Peru's first female president. Elon Musk, financially a very big hitter, announced in April he was about to buy Twitter. £44 billion the price for the Tesla boss to buy the platform that had an operating loss. Musk, probably the world's richest man, said promoting free speech was key to his plan. Twitter's the digital town square, he tweeted. With some raised eyebrows, this was greeted. Like many powerful men, all speech is free. Means say anything you like, as long as I agree. Weeks later he tried to back out of the deal and launched himself into a legal minefield, and just when we thought the whole thing was dead, he turned those rumours fully on their head. Having worked his way through the legal storm, in October he at last acquired the platform, and now this extremely filthy rich chap promises the world his everything app. Since then he slashed Twitter's payroll and apparently relinquished his control. And free speech is back, as demonstrated by Trump's account being reinstated. A Halloween disaster struck the heart of Seoul. 156 died as a crowd lost control. A failed assassination attempt in Pakistan in November against former PM Imran Khan. In the same month, many world leaders took a break and attended COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. It left many feeling dejected, melancholy, a jolly waste of time, a pointless desert jolly. Previous commitments are becoming moribund. The only success was a loss and damage fund. Experts say current policies of all countries are leading us to global warming of 2.7 degrees, almost double the initial target of COP21. Greta was quite prescient by choosing not to come. So 200 countries agreed to compensate the poor for loss and damage while we let the damage soar. And 2022 gave proof, if any were needed, that global warming warnings must be heeded. While man-made mayhem carried on in Ukraine, record drought and heatwave was ravaging Spain. In fact, extreme temperatures and drought are now commonplace. The USA in December had the coldest storm it had ever faced, and in late September the world was seeing the devastating effects of Hurricane Ian. In November, an Asian European to-do. A big bomb in Istanbul killed 6. What to do? Turkey decided the Kurds were to blame, so bombed North Syria to give back the same. And finally, 15th of November was the date that the head of the UN told us to celebrate. The human population reached the 8 billion mark. That fact for some is joyous, for others it's stark. Births are outscoring deaths at an alarming pace due to many advancements in the human race. In the last century, the human stock is up 4-fold. Where is this all leading? That cannot be foretold.